Welcome back. My name is Dave and this is Fuzzee Tutorials. So today I'm going to show you how to do the BIOS setup on this computer that we built a little while ago. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to take a look at those first couple of build videos where we actually put the computer together. Before we can actually install Windows, you need to set up the BIOS to make sure everything is set up the way it should be. Full disclosure, I've already gone through this once and the operating system has actually been installed, but I had some issues with the way I filmed it the first time, so I had to get some new equipment so that I could capture the output from the video card to the monitor directly instead of trying to take a picture with a camera. So it caused a bit of a delay. My apologies for that if you've been waiting for this video. And I've already gone in and reset to factory defaults so that I can show you. Okay, when you see that little thing come up in the upper right corner, that's when you got to start hitting the delete key. And then you'll come into the BIOS. And then we're going to go to Advanced. And then the first thing we need to do is flash the BIOS. So before we get to that, what I needed to do was to go to the manufacturer's website and download the latest BIOS for this particular motherboard. Now I'll put a link in the description below that'll tell you where to go for this particular board if you happen to buy this one. And I'll also provide some links in the description for all the parts for this build. They are in the other videos as well, but I'll put them here for your convenience. Now, you won't be able to see the actual BIOS version change because I've already updated the BIOS on here, but I'll take you through the procedure. And then what you need to do is take that file that you download and unzip it, if it hasn't been unzipped already, and load it onto your USB thumb drive. And then we'll go over here in the lower left corner and we'll click on the M flash and we'll select yes. And that's going to reboot us and show us our thumb drive. You don't have to hit any keys, it'll automatically bring you into flash mode. Okay, so what you're looking at here is my flash drive, or my USB thumb drive. And so you would go in here and you would click on BIOS file that you downloaded, and then we'll select yes. And now it's going through the process of updating the BIOS. Now don't worry, even though I've done it before, it's not going to hurt anything to reflash it with the same BIOS. And I don't know if this is actually the latest and greatest BIOS for this board, but it was the latest one they had when I put the system together. And since the system operates perfectly fine, we won't bother updating it. Now, for those of you who might be looking at upgrading yourself to a Ryzen 5000 series chip, this motherboard will support it, but it is only a 450 class, so they're not going to provide a BIOS update to allow you to do that until sometime in the first quarter 2021. So you would have to wait a few months before you could do that, which is just as well because availability on those chips right now is non-existent. So I think pretty much every chip available sold out in about 5 minutes after release, and this stock is going to be trickling in pretty slow for the next couple of months. So not something that you really need to be concerned about anytime soon with this particular board. Now if you've bought a a 500 series board like a B550 or an X570 board, if you're buying it right now, then it should come already supporting Ryzen 5000. But if not, there will be, if you've already bought it and want to upgrade, the BIOS should be available right now for most major boards. And we'll hit the delete key and get back into the BIOS. Okay, so now we're going to go back into advanced. And now you'll notice that right now our CPU speed is only 3.6 gigahertz and our DDR speed is only 2133. But we've got 3200 megahertz RAM, and this is a AMD 3700X processor. So this speed should actually be 3.7. So we're going to go into the overclocking settings, and we're going to go to CP ratio, and then we use the keyboard plus or minus keys, and we adjust that CPU ratio to 37. And then we go to our AXMP, which is currently set to disabled, and we're going to set it to profile 1. So that should give us, if we look down here to our adjusted RAM frequency, we're sitting at 3200 megahertz, which is what it should be. Now we're going to go back out to our settings here, and we're going to select save and exit, and we're going to save changes and reboot, and we'll go yes, and then be ready to hit that delete key. Okay, so now when you look back at the top here, we see that our CPU and memory speed are back up to what they're supposed to be for this installation. And we'll make sure that we've got our full 32 gigs of memory. And our CPU and motherboard temperatures look good. So now I'm going to take you into some of these other advanced settings here. You can take, if you want to, you can take a moment and go into the system status and check things out. Now, when you first get your motherboard from the factory, this clock is not going to be correct. And this is something you should always check, because there are some rare instances on some motherboards. One brand of motherboard in particular, I believe it's Gigabyte. Sometimes it will come with a date that's way out to lunch, and if you try and install Windows with a date that's more than 100 years out of range, it will hang up on you and it'll be very difficult to figure out. A lot of people have wound up replacing every part in their system trying to see what went wrong, and they didn't think to actually wipe out their boot drive and start fresh. So even though Windows will let you change the date and time, if you actually install with a way out to lunch date in the BIOS, then that gets saved into the settings, and then Windows will hang on boot. So this is something you need to go in and make sure that it's the correct year. There are a few cases with those particular boards from Gigabyte where the date shows up sometime in 3020 instead of 2020, or some obscure setting like that. And then we just verify that the hardware we've installed in the system is showing up properly. And so now we've confirmed that. We'll go back and we'll go into our advanced settings. And you want to just make sure that these PCIe settings are on auto, and that this one right here, above 4 gigs of memory, which is something specific to cryptocurrency mining most of the time. Make sure that's disabled, and leave this on auto unless you're having issues getting your video card interfering with another card you've got in a different PCIe slot. Then you can forcibly tell it which device is in which slot. But unless you're having issues, leave these settings alone. But we always like to verify and make sure they're what they should be. Now there is an LED on the motherboard for power that you can use if you don't have a case that supports hooking up a power LED. And this one does have a power LED. It just doesn't have a hard drive activity LED. So we can leave this on auto, but it's just good to make sure that there's something that it can grab your attention with by blinking the light. And you want to make sure that if you've got a LAN port on your motherboard, you want to make sure that that's enabled. And we want to make sure that our SATA mode is set to HCI. And if you've got multiple drives, then you would want to verify that setting for all of your other drives. Now these specifically here are for hot plug drives, so this is if you've got a RAID configuration, so that you can pull a drive and replace it if it goes bad without turning the computer off. And we want to make sure that our built-in audio is enabled. Unless for some reason you've got an external audio device that you're going to use instead, then you would disable the onboard audio here. And most times you're going to want to leave both of these enabled, as well as your enhanced mouse speed. If you're finding your mouse is working at the speed you want, then just leave it alone. But you can change it by using your plus and minus keys on the keyboard, but we're not going to mess with that. Now if you've got some older legacy devices that you still need to hook up and you've got the adapters that you've been able to plug onto the motherboard, this is where you would come in and set up your configuration for it. So if you've got like an older style printer that uses the parallel printer port, and that's where you would set it up. And same thing with if you've got some serial device. Maybe you're a small business and you've got an older style wand that you use to scan barcodes with that maybe still uses a serial port, or maybe an old serial printer. So this is where you'd come in and set up your IRQ or interrupt request specifications. If you're using older style devices, you're probably already going to know what that means. And if you don't, I'm sure you'd be able to find a manual for that. If you don't have the original manual, I'm sure you can find one online. They're pretty available these days. We will go back out. And if you don't want to use your mouse to back out of these menus, you can use the escape key on your keyboard. Now this is something that you're going to want to possibly look at. Now in the case of this installation, my client that I built this system for, he lives out in the country and they have a lot of power outages. And he doesn't want his computer automatically booting up when the power comes on. So this is where you need to switch this to off. Now if you're living in town or you've got battery backup, or you normally leave your computer on and you want it rebooting automatically when the power outage is over, then you're going to want to set it to either on or to the whatever state it was in when the power outage occurred, which is what those other two settings are. So now this setting right here, if you don't have a UPS or an uninterruptible power supply, or battery backup essentially, if you don't have one of those and you don't have any type of protection in the form of a high-end power bar that protects you from bad power or voltage spikes and stuff, you can enable this here and it will detect if you've got a power spike that comes in and automatically shut your system down to prevent it from getting damaged. But unfortunately, it doesn't operate as fast as a high-end power bar with that protection built in. So I wouldn't count on this. I would really recommend, at the very minimum, spending $100 and getting yourself a power bar with good protection, especially if you're out in the country or if you're not somewhere in North America. A lot of other countries have a lot more issues with power than we do in Canada here. Now really I would recommend that you have a good quality UPS. Now if you kind of know what you're doing with Windows, then this is where you would come in and set up some advanced settings, but we're not going to mess with this. And this is where you can, if you're leaving your computer on but letting it go into sleep mode, these are some of the various things you can do to have it wake up from sleep other than pressing the power button. So we're going to turn on the any key for resuming from keyboard, and we're also going to enable resuming with a mouse click. Now you can also set it to automatically resume if you plug in a USB device. Now if you're not worried about security, you can turn this on, and in our case we're going to be doing that. So you can also have it detect activity coming in on something you've got plugged into a PCIe slot, and you can also have it resume if it detects something coming in on your real-time clock. So those are the only setting changes we're going to make there. Now, secure erase. This isn't something I'm going to take you through. This is a little more advanced, but if you're installing a used hard drive from another system, you're probably going to want to come in and do a secure erase just to make sure that everything on that drive is clean. And this will, it's not the same as the old, from back in the day when we used to have to low-level format a drive. This isn't like that, but this will kind of refresh everything on the drive, especially if it's a hard drive. And it will overwrite everything on the drive with all zeros, and you can tell it to do it several times. So if you've got sensitive information on your drive and you're going to be selling your computer, this is a way you can come in and securely erase everything. And if you want a military level erasure, then you're going to need to overwrite the drive 7 times. That's kind of the standard to make sure absolutely nothing can be recovered. Because just doing a standard format on the drive, all it does is delete your tables on the drive that tell it where all the files are, but it doesn't actually delete the files. So it just kind of resets everything but leaves all the data there. This is where you would want to use a feature like this to make sure everything's gone if that drive is going to be going somewhere else. Another reason I recommend this, even if you're not giving the drive to someone else or selling it or whatever, is if you've happened to have gotten any type of malware or viruses, depending on the type of virus it is, it could reinfect your system if it's left on the drive, even if you've done just the standard format on it. This is something I would recommend doing at least a one-time secure erase where it rewrites zeros to everything on the drive once. That's enough to wipe out any type of viruses or anything. If somebody with special hardware and software was to go in there, they could still recover information, but that's not going to allow the virus to reinfect your system. I would definitely recommend doing this on a used drive, even if it's coming from another system of your own, just to be sure. But keep in mind, when you do that, of course, everything will be wiped out. So if you haven't backed up data that you need, you're going to need to go do that first before doing this. Now, we're not going to get into the AMD overclocking stuff because this is a client's creator production system. So He's going to be doing video editing and production type stuff, so we want to make sure the system is going to be stable. Now this is kind of a personal taste thing. I like to enable this post beep. What that means is you're going to get a beep through your speakers when the system is doing its initial power on self test. So if you're completely powered off, then it's going to beep to let you know it's successfully completed your power on self test. That's just something I like to have in there. It's a good idea to have this set on Legacy Plus UEFI. UEFI is something that you need for the new Windows, for Windows 10. I'm not sure which version of Windows implemented using this. The last version of Windows I used was Windows XP, so, and then I switched to Mac for many years. So now down here, option number 13, you'll see where it says network. So this is something that you would use if you're a small business and you've got a network server that you're wanting your computers, your workstations to boot from. You would move this up to be ahead of everything else if that's the case, and then it would only boot off of the internal drive or something else if the network boot wasn't available. So everything else in here looks good, so we can go back. Now if you want to add a level of security, you can come in and set up administrator passwords and user passwords. And what that will do for you is an administrator password would be required for anybody to access this BIOS that we're in right now, making these changes. So if you're going to use that, make really darn sure that you record that password, because if you don't, the only way you could get around it is if you pulled the battery and did a clear CMOS. There's usually a switch or a jumper on the board you would need to use. This is a newer motherboard, so, or it's a brand new motherboard, so it's probably got just a push button switch somewhere that will reset all the settings. Then all the changes that you've made, of course, would be wiped out. And then a user level password, if you decide to activate that, then anybody booting up the system will need at least that user password to be able to boot up. And then we've got trusted security devices. So if you want to use a remote device that isn't a full-blown network server, then you can set up one of those here. If you want to actually require a dongle to boot up, that's done in a different area, but that's pretty advanced stuff, and we're not going to get into that here. If you have a need for that, you probably already know how to do that, so it's kind of outside of the scope of this tutorial. Then you can actually go in and enable chassis intrusion. Now, I'm not positive that this motherboard actually supports that. I think it does, but basically what that is you have to have a case that actually has switches that will activate when you open a panel on the computer, and then that can send a signal to the motherboard that someone is trying to access the computer through the inside of the computer. That's where you would use that, but those are pretty high-end server style cases, so chances are it's not something you would ever have to worry about. Okay, so that's basically all the setting changes that we're going to need to worry about. We're just going to hit save and exit. Basically you're done, and then we're on to the next section. Here's where if we want to override the boot settings that we were just into, this is where you can set up some other choices. So being that the USB stick or thumb drive that I've got in here right now is bootable, it can be set up to boot the computer on. And it's a good idea to leave this in place, because it'll automatically recognize any bootable USB device that you put in there. Now if you're in a secure environment where you don't want people being able to bypass your boot up, then you for sure want to disable this. But for our purposes, we're going to leave this enabled. If you are dealing with a system where it has been disabled and you need to get in and fix something by booting off of a memory stick, then this is where you would come to make that setting change. And now this is our SSD drive here, and this is our 2 terabyte hard drive. This is just seeing a different version of that same thumb drive. And then lastly, of course, is our built-in UEFI shell, which is what we're in. I call it the BIOS. So we're going to save our changes and reboot. And there we are, booted up into Windows. So that's it for this tutorial, folks. If you find our content useful and you enjoy it, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. I'm going to pop up a couple of links for you to look at here at the end of the video. One is a video I think you should watch next. It's actually going to be the next one in this series, which will be how to install Windows 10 on this computer. Then the other one will be one from my channel that YouTube thinks you should watch. So thanks for stopping by. If you're looking for other resources, I recommend you visit my website, which is www.fuzzed.ca. There I've got a bunch of DaVinci Resolve resources as well as reviews on computer parts with affiliate links. Plus the links I'm providing below in the description are affiliate links, so if you do use those to purchase a product, I will make a small commission off that, but it won't cost you any more. You get the same great deal that you would get otherwise. It just helps me out a little bit for putting all this work in. Help support my channel. You can also find information you need on my site to donate if you wish to do that to support what we do here. So thanks for stopping by today. I appreciate you hanging out with me. We hope to see you soon. Bye for now.